I'm with Nick Gillespie, everybody. Welcome back to Walk-Ins Welcome.
Oh, it's been too long.
It has been too long. Congratulations on getting married.
Thank you. Yeah, I got married last September, and I'm very happy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And you guys were, how long were you together before you got married?
Probably about 7 years, something like that.
Okay,
yeah,
wow.
So it had been a while, and, we were on and off and whatnot. And now we're married.
And were you guys kind of not anti-marriage? Was that?
No,
okay.
It was never that. Now, I've been married once before, and I have 2 adult kids. Sarah Siskin, my wife, is the product of a marriage. Her parents were married, so no, it wasn't anti-marriage.
Oh, okay.
Ever, yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was like, we're into the poly life because we're libertarians.
Yeah, no. It's funny. I know fewer and fewer libertarians who are poly type stuff, and it's more. It strikes me it's a lot of weird conservatives who are kind of on the down low about poly, or liberal/progressives. I'm not saying there aren't, but one of the things about libertarians is that, I think we tend to believe anything is fine as long as it's between consenting adults or among consenting adults. But it's about being able to make choices, and a lot of the choices that individual people make are pretty. I would say not conservative, but traditional or kind of mainstream. And it's more just a question of being able to pick among different choices.
What is your take on the state of libertarianism right now?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's, a lot of different things to factor into it. Like there's the Libertarian Party, which really did something great by bringing Trump to their convention last year and getting him to promise to get to release Ross Ulbricht, the guy who founded the Silk Road, and that was the deep web drug site. That was the test case, really, the use case for Bitcoin. Like it showed that Bitcoin could be used, et cetera. Obviously, it was also a reminder that Bitcoin is pseudonymous, not anonymous, and so it got traced back to him, but he's out. That was good. But overall, the Libertarian Party has done very poorly. Like they had so many internal squabbles that they're much smaller than they had been 10 years ago, or like when Gary Johnson was running for president. They're in a rebuilding phase now, so that might be good. But then there's real a lot of dissension among libertarians, which is not surprising since we all are, insane in our own ways. But I think the libertarian movement, broadly speaking, is going to move into a really powerful period, because one of our things is, before Trump versus Hillary, and before Obama, versus McCain and what's his face, Mitt Romney, and certainly with George Bush and Al Gore. And I've been working at Reason Magazine, which was founded in 1968. I've been working there since 93. I became editor-in-chief in 2000. And, when Al Gore and George W. Bush were running, they looked alike. Their platforms are actually very close to one another. It was like, okay, do you want tan or beige? That was like the choice. And we were like, what, this is not good. There's a better way out there. And, we're back to that place now, I think, where people start to understand, when you look, okay, Trump and Harris, these aren't great choices, but we're going to make a choice. And then you realize, like, Trump isn't what you wanted. And I think that's becoming clear. Harris was definitely not what you wanted. Like, people are going to be looking for an alternative. And I think Reason, certainly, the magazine of free minds and free markets, of, letting people have the maximum degree possibility in how to choose to live your life. What drugs you take, where you live, what kind of business you run, how you dress, just let it flow. This is the message that people need right now, because we've gone from an insane period of, kind of progressive left-leaning bullshit where everything, the only thing that, didn't happen in the past 5 years is that men weren't like required to sit when they pee. I mean, but it was like everywhere, every choice you made was being, dictated or like run through some kind of weird political lens. And then Trump takes over, and now it's the same thing. It's just a bunch of different restrictions. So I think people are going to be looking towards libertarianism more.
What are some of the restrictions under Trump that you feel are like the most egregious since he's taken office?
Yeah, I mean, first off, two things. First, tariffs. And the idea, one of the big things about I think libertarian thinking is that economic freedom is a form of freedom. It is a civil liberty, just like free speech. And, being in control of your body, whether you want an abortion, whether you want to marry somebody of the same sex or whatever, and the tariff stuff and the way that he is talking about trade, where it's like, okay, you know what, you don't get to pick what you purchase because I'm going to decide. And these whole countries, like, no, you don't get that. You don't get goods from there, or you do, but you're going to pay 20% more, 50% more, or whatever. And like, depending on, when the Diet Coke is kicking in, it's 100% or it's 10%, or it's like, no, we're friends with them, right? I think also then immigration is something similar like this. Like, everybody knows that the border needed to be secured better than it was. The southern border under Biden, fucked that up royally. In his last year, he actually started, securing it. And if you look back from January 2023, or rather January 24 to January 25, there were massive cuts in the number of people coming across who weren't vetted and things like that. That's good. But then Trump's alternative is to say, okay, well, we're going to cut all immigration ultimately, and we're going to start rounding people up, and we're going to start saying, you're a gay hairdresser from Venezuela and you have a snake tattoo, so we're going to deport you and send you back to Venezuela because you're part of a gang, and we're going to park you in an El Salvadoran prison. Like, this kind of quick roundup without any semblance of due process or rationality is bad news. And then on top of that, you're a Lebanese doctor, who teaches at Columbia or Brown University or something. And it's like, you go visit somebody, you come back, and it's like, oh, you know what, you're not coming back in, even though you're a green card holder, that type of stuff.
And is that pretty commonly happening? I've not been paying attention to the news enough.
Yeah. I mean, and this was part of, he promised that he was going to crack down on illegal immigration, and he was going to start with criminals. But the problem is that criminals kind of, if they're here, they know how to stay hidden. And so if you want the numbers, you got to start going after people who are kind of in public view and things like that.
But like, Elon's very pro H-1B visa, right?
Yeah.
So that was like a weird...
and we can get to him in a second too, but we're not, he's not in control. There's factions, right, within the Trump world, and the hardcore MAGA people, the Make America Great Again people, and this is J.D. Vance is an example of this. They are not pro-immigration, and they'll say at first, well, I'm not pro-illegal immigration, I'm against illegal immigration, and then it starts to come, well, I'm not pro-immigration for people who come from countries that have no democratic tradition, which somehow means something, a place like Mexico, right? And or Haiti, like they want to get rid of temporary protected status on Haitians, et cetera. Those people are at war with Elon Musk on the question of immigration, because he and people who run companies, first off, like, we need workers in the country, but then also high-tech countries, they tend to be very much like, we want skilled immigrants, we want people like that. It remains to be seen, what happens, because like in his first term, Trump had, people who were isolationists in foreign policy and super interventionists, and it takes a while to see which faction is going to win.
Yeah, that was something interesting that came out of the whole group chat thing that got leaked yesterday, or, well, not even leaked.
Well, it was reported. It was,
And I thought it was funny because I was like, truly at its root, every group chat is just people talking shit. Yeah. And in this case, they were just talking shit about Europe.
Yeah.
At its core, which is so weird. They're like weird European hate. Because even within MAGA, like the far right, new right MAGA, there seems to be this kind of romanticism about like European just being of European descent, obviously, but also just a European, like, this is what they took from us, this whole mentality.
Right. Yeah.
So it's weird to see somebody in the MAGA faction being so anti Europe.
A lot of them are kind of pro-Russia at this point, or Hungary, which, Viktor Orban, the leader there, is kind of a strong man who makes a lot of gestures towards traditional culture, traditional Christian culture, whatever that means. So there's some of that, but then they really hate Zelensky in Ukraine. And personally, I don't think the United States should be heavily involved in European wars and things like that. But I also know that, like, as an American and as a libertarian, like, anybody who has kind words for Putin is, like, off the deep end. Like, that's just wrong.
Is that because we're older and we were born into, like, I mean, Putin's bad, obviously. I don't think that, well, I mean, maybe it does need saying now, but I clearly think he's a dictator. I'd be pushed off a balcony long ago.
Right.
I thought the weird, like, Tucker making those McDonald's video, that was very strange to me. That whole turn. But I was saying maybe this is because I'm Gen X and they were our enemy growing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were just it was in every movie, every pop culture reference, everything was like
I'm a very late baby boomer, like right on the cusp of Gen X. So I grew up watching reruns of things like Gilligan's Island and I Dream of Jeannie, and like every fucking episode, there's like a cosmonaut who has landed. I mean, like, the Cold War was shot through everything, and it's
truly
it's worth deprogramming, right? Like, because that was. America was not perfect during the Cold War. Capitalism or free enterprise is better than socialism or communism. But, like, there was a lot of bullshit going on there. But I don't think it's that, because Tucker is like Gen X or a baby boomer. I mean, he's like in his late 50s or early 60s. He knows better. There's just something cuckoo going on there.
Yeah.
More broadly about, Europe versus America, this is something that is worth thinking about when people talk about, Europe has, the people there have a sense of place and cultural identity and, national identity. It's like, that's what everybody in America left. They left that Europe because they were on the shit end of that stick. I mean, my grandparents were, on my father's side, they're Irish. On my mother's side, they're Italian. They all came over in the 19-teens because Europe was based on, like, an ethnic solidarity and tradition where there were no jobs. And, like, if you weren't born into the right family or the right bloodlines, you were just kind of fucked. I mean, like, for 1,000 years, my relatives in Europe were serfs and peasants and worse. And they came over here and, like, they were able to be lower middle class, which was like living like a fucking king.
Right.
And, my Italian grandparents never spoke English. And, they birthed two sons, one who fought in World War II, one who fought in Korea, and two girls who were all hard workers. And by the time they died, they were all, like, totally perfectly American. And I don't speak any Italian.
Right.
My Irish grandmother actually grew up speaking Irish as well as English, but, like, none of that. Like, we assimilated, new immigrants are assimilating, but the whole point of America is that, like, you come over here with whatever shitty hand fate dealt you and you play it into something better. And it's very anti-European. So it always just bugs me, anybody, whether they're right wing or left wing. And there's, like, a lot of lefties like Bernie Sanders who's like, oh, Scandinavia is so perfect.
Yeah.
And it's like he doesn't even understand, Sweden is like a super capitalist country. And, that they have their own problems. But,
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing to, like, watch play out. My cousin, I have a German cousin. So it's a long story, but an uncle really loved communism at one point in our big family and left America chasing it.
Oh, really?
And
is this cousin or Uncle Lee Harvey Oswald?
No.
Oh, okay.
And he ended up living there, staying there, marrying a German woman. So we have a German cousin. She spent a lot. She's a couple years younger than me.
Did he go to East Germany or West Germany?
Well, what year was it? It was 82 when I think he went there.
Okay.
And then now he gives tours.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And my cousin I will never forget visiting her in Berlin, and it was during the European Cup. So it was and she was like, "Oh, I hate the Euro Cup. It's just an excuse for nationalism." She was like, "It's just a European excuse to be," and she was like, "And we know where that gets us, like historically." She's very left. She's, you know, it was just an interesting perspective from somebody.
And Germany is especially touchy about that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
As they should be.
Exactly. She was like, "Oh, I hate this. This is an excuse for all of these countries to be like, you know, very racist."
You know what's an amazing statistic, by the way, and I'll tie this back to kind of Trump, as well as like Biden or Democrats too, but virtually every state in America, like Mississippi, you know, which is like the Haiti of America or something, right?
Yes.
Their GDP, like their standard of living, their per capita money and purchasing power is higher than virtually every European country, with the exception of like Luxembourg and Switzerland.
Yeah.
And Ireland actually has an insanely high. But you forget that. And like when people are, lionize Europe, it's like, like it's a great place to visit. I was in Italy for part of my honeymoon, and it's a great place to visit, but it's a sucky place to, ultimately to live and work and thrive. And like compared to 40 years ago or 30 years ago, if you take the countries that comprise the EU, their GDP, like their economic activity, used to be the same as the US, and now it's like less than 50% because they went super idiotic on like regulation and on clamping down on, new business formation and the ability of people to live their lives. And that's worth thinking about. And that's why, when people on the right look towards Europe for anything, they're always like, oh, I like that ethno-solidarity stuff. And it's like, you're fucking insane. And then the left is like, oh, but they have such good cheese and
healthcare.
Or whatever.
And healthcare.
Yeah. And it's like, no, they really don't. And like, we can have that here. All you have to do is like let people sell unpasteurized dairy products, and let a free market actually work in healthcare. But
it's funny. There was this video that went viral that I loved, and it was a guy just ranting about Europe and how basically it's like Disneyland for America now. And he was like, listen, Europe, you're done. Like, you haven't made anything nice in years. You make some cool cheeses and some wines, but now you're basically just Disneyland for middle-class Americans because it's so cheap to go there, and they're everywhere. And he was just knocking on their castles and I do think
it's great to visit. I mean,
well, and the whole Instagram culture has really blown up Europe as this kind of influencer haven.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And now they're pushing back against that. That like in Spain, they're trying to get rid of all the tourists.
But I mean, it's wrong to say this, but like the EU or Europe is kind of done, right? Not all of the places. Like Sweden is a country that has 10 or 12 million people and punches above its weight. Like it's created a bunch of international brands. It has a high standard of living, all of that kind of stuff. And, there are parts of it that are doing well, but it's like, no, it's like, it's not the future. It's the past.
I mean, you can get a house in Italy for like €500.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, truly, they're like begging people to come to these remote villages, and it's one of those things.
But who wants? I mean, it's kind of like people don't want to live there. I mean, and you can talk about this in the U.S. too. I mean, it's great. I know I talked with you on the Reason Interview podcast, maybe 2 years ago, or whenever you left L.A. to move to Texas. You see, there's parts of this also apply to the United States. Like I live in New York City. It took me literally 30 years to be able to move back there. I love New York City, but it's, you pay an enormous tax to live there, which I like, and it's got a lot of energy and stuff like that. But, the four most populous states in the U.S. are California, Texas, Florida, and New York. Mm-hmm. Two of them are red, mostly red. Two of them are blue. And people are leaving places like California and New York for places like Texas. And we should draw a lot of lessons from that. And, the lessons mostly are that, if you tax and regulate people less and you allow them to pursue happiness however they see fit, good things happen, and a lot of people want to move there. Texas has a shitty climate,
Yeah, it's not great.
But people in California are always like, oh, nobody would ever choose to live anywhere else, and it's like, yeah, that's wrong. I mean, it's objectively wrong. And New York was the most populous state up until like 62 when California took over. My parents who lived there, they were like, everybody was saying, why would anyone go to California? Everybody wants to live in the New York metro area.
Right.
And then you look up a decade later and it's like everybody who can has left, because of taxes, regulation, just, nuisance stuff.
Yep. It's weird. I saw this clip go viral yesterday or 2 days ago, and it was Rob Lowe talking with what's the guy's name in Severance, the lead actor. They were on Parks and Rec together. Adam whatever.
Yeah.
So they were talking, and Rob Lowe was saying it's criminal, basically, that it's cheaper. They were like, if we were doing Parks and Rec, we would be in Budapest.
Yeah,
and then they were saying it's cheaper to fly an entire crew to Ireland. And then Rob Carolla got in on it. And he was like, the fact that they can see this about their own industry, but not every industry in California, this applies to everybody. It applied to me, a small business owner who makes online content.
Right.
It applies to, how did you lose Hollywood and Silicon Valley?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And it's going to, somebody was saying this to me today, like, it's going to take decades for Hollywood and for California to recover if it even can.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think a lot about this because I was born in Brooklyn. Now I grew up in New Jersey. And I think a lot about New York State and upstate New York, which used to be, like an industrial hub. And it used, and farming and all of that. Like it's like East Germany.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's a wasteland and it still hasn't come back. I mean, it's been 60 years of depopulation, and it's like it might as well be Chernobyl. I went to grad school in Buffalo, which, in around 1900 through about 1920 or so, Buffalo was one of the wealthiest cities in the country and the world because all freight that went east or west, like came on the Great Lakes and then got put on trains in Buffalo or near Buffalo, or going west, it would to be on trains until then and then get on ships and go west. And it's like Buffalo has never come back. So it can, when you go into decline, it doesn't mean like, okay, after a century, people will rediscover you. If the same kind of overlay of, stupid taxes, stupid regulation, just hostility to change and innovation persists, like then you just stay poor forever. Ireland was, part of it was because of British occupation, but Ireland was a dump for like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
It was like, and then
people.
Yeah. No, that's why I'm touching on it. Mine as well. And it's like,
every time I see Michael Malice, he hands me a potato.
Yeah. And you're grateful for it.
I am. I'm like, you mock me, but this kept me alive.
From what I understand, Ireland is like the only country in Europe that has fewer people now than it had in like about 1850, before the potato famine had really kind of both killed people, but people fled. The Irish diaspora is one of the biggest in the world, and it took really a long time until they even had net in-migration. It took until like the late 1990s. And then, of course, the first thing they do now, and they're doing this now, is like they're bitching about all these immigrants coming in. And it's like, you fucking idiots. Like, you've been waiting 500 years to finally like have more people show up, and like all you can do is complain.
But it is like a little bit, there are problems, right?
Yeah. Sometimes with immigration, sometimes with growth. And again, when you take it outside of kind of like explicit ethnic tensions and things like that, and just think of like a place like Austin or a state like Texas, with growth, comes growing pains. There's always mismatches between housing supply and housing demand. Schools are a big thing. There's always weirdness, like in Texas, in the after the Vietnam War and actually the collapse of Vietnam, but starting in the late 70s through the 80s, a lot of Vietnamese started showing up here because the Gulf Coast offers, a kind of similar lifestyle to parts of Vietnam, as well as there were a lot of Catholics here, and Vietnamese refugees were often resettled through Catholic churches. And, that was like real tension because it's like, who the fuck are these people? They're not Mexican. The Mexicans were here before the American Anglos.
Right.
So that's like, and there's tension always, but like, okay, we kind of got that. But then like these people come from another planet and there's tension. And then like, it takes a little while and, within a generation or two, like everybody's Texas now.
Right. Yeah, I live in definitely like an H-1B visa neighborhood. Like we live out in the, that was an interesting thing that popped up because we're firmly middle class, I think, just by definition. And
well, the median, it's always worth nailing that. The median household income in America, which, means half or below, half or above, is like about $108,000.
Yeah, that would be us. I'm not like making people. I think people think when you're.
I assumed you were like a YouTube billionaire.
No,
that you give Mr. Beast money, like interest-free loans.
I wish. No, I think when you're around people with money, people assume you have a lot of money, and it's just not. We're very firmly middle class. I mean, I also have like I have one employee basically, so we're not. I'm not making seven figures by any means at all. We're not in the low end of six, and that's split in half basically.
Right.
And so. We're right around there in a middle class neighborhood, and everybody around us is. It was interesting to see the H-1B visa debate blow up over the holidays, which was weird. I was like, guys, you get a life, guys. What are you doing online arguing over Christmas?
Whatever you can do not to talk to your family.
Yeah, I guess that's how I looked at it. I'm like, wow, you all have horrible families or something. And they were a lot of the like very anti H-1B visa people were like, they're replacing the middle class in America with H-1B visas. I was like whistling, I'm like, do. Like, I can see why you'd make that argument.
Right. But this, these things are, and it's, one of the things to recognize is like the 21st century has been one of like massive ongoing upheaval and disruption, right? From, even, Bush versus Gore, the fact that election was a dead heat and it kind of like was a temblor, right? Of like what was to come of like, oh yeah, you know what? Like actually the country is kind of not sure of, which path to take. And it's going to be within a distant, within the margin of error. And people are going to get pissed off about that. Then you have 9/11, then you have, the Iraq war in particular, like, what I would say was a war of choice that extended a lot, and it empowered a lot of bad government actions, as well as like a lot of domestic spending to kind of shut people up. Then you had the financial crisis. Then you had, Trump, not Trump being bad, but just like, nobody expected Trump to win. And like you have this moment where things are just very different.
Well, some people did.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say nobody.
Well, I mean, he didn't. Let's put it this way. Yeah, by every account, he didn't even bother figuring out who his cabinet was going to be and stuff. Then you have COVID, and then you layer on top of that, like, disruptive changes in media, which I think overall are good, but they're, it takes a while to get used to in social media.
And now we have AI.
Yeah, and and it's like, wow, this is
and AI
this is going fast. Yeah, so there's a lot of anxiety about stuff, but one of the things that I think people fundamentally misunderstand is that, the middle class is not shrinking. Like people are actually doing really well. And when you look at things like home ownership, when you look at things like, people going to college, people being able to live how they want, things are actually, they're good. Like they're not great. They can always be better, but both large kind of ideological forces, liberals and conservatives and Democrats and Republicans, you never hear one of them say, you know what, things are pretty good and here's how we make them better. It's always like, this is the worst thing we will ever have. I mean, Elon Musk was tweeting, if Kamala Harris wins, there won't be another election.
I know.
Which is exactly what people on the left were saying. Like, if Donald Trump gets reelected, that's it. There's no more democracy. And it's like, you people are living in like cloud cuckoo land.
It's histrionic personality disorder.
Yeah. And like the whole industrial stuff, this is another thing that I dislike about Trump, and again, I didn't vote for him. I dutifully voted for the Libertarian Party candidate because I have never voted for a successful candidate for any office at any level, including high school student council. I just can never pick them. But I wanted him to win, and I think it's better that he won.
Trump.
Trump than Harris. But it's it has unleashed this, negativity vibe, even in winning, where it's like we are barely hanging on as a country, like we're on the cliff and our fingernails are digging into solid rock and we're sliding down. And it's kind of like that's a vast misunderstanding of what's actually going on in the country. And then people are like, and that's why we have to get rid of all immigrants, especially high-skilled ones, but also low-skilled ones. And, and it doesn't matter if there are more job openings listed now that are unfilled than ever in human history.
Right.
The important thing is to block out everybody else so that, our children can go back to working in factories or something. It's a very emotion-driven, ahistorical understanding of where we're at.
It's funny too. I follow Banchi he's on Twitter, and I love his takes often because he's like, "What is this?" When you talk to how many people want their kids working in factories for the rest of their life, this isn't something that you are aspiring to. By the way,
well, it's only because
AI is going to come take most of those jobs.
I was going to say
they
only want us to work in factories because their coal mines really have shut down. Because that's really what parents want. The best thing would be to work in a coal mine because that's the purest thing. I'm joking. I'm just saying it's and the fact of the matter is that America's industrial power, the proportion of people who worked in factories peaked in the late 40s, and it's been going down ever since in a kind of straight slope, and it won't reach zero, but it's going to approach zero. And most of that is not because China makes everything. We make more stuff than we've ever made, as a country. We just do it more effectively because of automation.
Right.
Automation is the reason there aren't those great factory jobs, which literally, my parents were like, my father didn't even graduate high school, and he was like, "You're going to go to college so that you don't work in a factory."
Right.
And
That's
it's like,
I
get
was
that.
Thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was just
and that's not to say, people who work in factories, that's great, but service jobs are more plentiful and they pay as well as factory jobs do. So it's like, can we start talking about how do we make economies more like Texas's economy and less like California or New York's? Rather than the world is ending. I'll also point out, that Texas and Florida are, as long as we're talking about immigration, which is very important to me, is, the states where immigrants go inevitably are the states that are flourishing.
Right.
Immigrants I lived in Ohio for a long time, and Ohio is, is at the center of the Rust Belt. I lived outside of Cincinnati in a small town. There was no people were moving there from foreign countries or from the U.S. And that was when it hit me that when you are in a place where immigrants are choosing to go through rather than stay, you're in a fucked situation.
Yeah. It's been really wild to watch. Even we just hit 200 dumpster fires, and we shot yesterday, just reminiscing I was looking at myself, even yes, I was 6 years younger, but I'm I was so easy breezy. I wasn't married. I didn't have a kid. So there's that. Just life changed. And then I was in California. Now I'm in Texas. It's wild, even when you put in perspective just the last kind of 6 years of America, let alone 10 years.
I think even the last 6 months, kind of, to be honest, it's hard to think back. Okay, what was December 2024 or say November before the election? And it is, we need to kind of take account for how fucked up everyday life is on a certain level, because like, Trump is an improbable figure, right? Like nobody would have guessed, okay, that like a TV billionaire is going to become president. And if it was, it's going to be him.
Mike Judge might have guessed that.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But then like you have all of that. But then last year too, like nobody would have guessed that the president of the United States would effectively be brain dead and reveal it willingly in a debate. Because, and then the response to that would be like, okay, we're gonna throw in Kamala Harris, who nobody liked and nobody had any faith in, and we're gonna pretend. I mean, it was like
it's a dumpster fire.
Yeah, it really is. And Trump comes roaring back, et cetera. And it's like, it's, these are strange times. And then on top of it, you mentioned AI, right? Yeah. Like, it is like, okay, all of this stuff is good. I'm very techno optimistic. I think like the technologies that stick around tend to benefit people much more than they discomfort them. And we're in an early adoption phase of this stuff. So it's going to be disruptive in the way that the internet was very disruptive in the 90s and early 2000s. But, if it helps people, it tends to work, and stick around. But it's like, yeah, we're in a weird space. What I'm happy about mostly is that, broadly speaking, economically, markets do really well at squeezing out all of the bullshit that governments and entrenched interests like big corporations throw at them. So we're having, decent economic growth. It could be a lot better, but I feel like we're at the, we've left an era that is bad, and we now have the potential to go to something good if we don't turn in on ourselves or be like, oh, well, we got to stop foreign goods. We can't compete with Canadian stuff, so like we're going to put massive tariffs on Canada or something like that. Like, this is stupid. I don't understand
the Canadian tariffs.
Yeah. It
does feel like they just really, I don't understand really any of it.
And to make it even worse is everything that governs trade between the U.S. and Canada was negotiated by Trump in his first term when he rewrote NAFTA. So it's like, what the, like at least acknowledge it. Like that you're saying, oh, that deal that I struck and I wouldn't shut the fuck up about.
This is the art of the deal.
Yeah. Like, that was a bad deal. Now I'm going to get us a good deal, but.
Yeah. No one can remember anything though.
No, that's true.
I mean, this is the kind of eternal.
This is what AI might help us with, right? Like,
really?
Did you ever use I think it's still around. There was I turned it off because it was depressing, which might answer the question, but there was an app you could use called Time Hop that would sift through all of your computers and your internet accounts or your social media accounts, and it would serve up every day like, oh, here's something from 2 years ago, from 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
I never used that.
And I was like, oh my God, like this, it's like, Memento, the movie or something where it's like you're seeing pictures and you're like, oh my God, like this is a trail of crimes that I had repressed thoroughly. But AI can help remind us maybe of, why we chose this rather than that the first time instead of constantly making the same dumb decision.
I don't know, because AI really is trained right now to, like, I have friends who are using AI to kind of self-diagnose and analyze. Mm-hmm. And AI is so flattering, and I tend to not trust anything that is that flattering. Because it is trained to tell you what you want to hear.
Right. Yeah.
Like it learns very, but this is just so they can eventually take us over. Like it's gonna ease us into a false sense of security.
I'm kind of happy. I mean, I appreciate the joke of that. I don't think it will be like that. And, part of it is that it's going to automate a lot of junk work.
It definitely does.
And I think about it, I've been a professional journalist, I guess, my entire, since I graduated college, I wrote for a living one way or the other. But I started out working for these really shitty business to business magazines where they would give you, the young kid, like, here's a bunch of press releases of new products, and just rewrite them.
Copywriting is the worst.
And I was like, I worked for one of the magazines was for machines that were used within banks. So, and this was like, the early 80s or mid 80s. So it was like, ATMs were still kind of new and stuff. And it'd be like, and so I would rewrite like a 3-line description of this new ATM type machine or something like that. Like that will all be automated in the way that weather reports are automated and stuff. Like AI will, and then maybe that means like you hire fewer interns or something, but it also means like the work that humans have to do will become more valued, I think.
This is my question. Are they trying to fix money in like a slow burn? What
do you mean?
Like money's broken. There's this idea, especially in the Bitcoin community, that money's broken fundamentally. How do we fix it? Yeah. And if we don't fix it, we'll have the same problems that they have in other countries. I did a whole series when the Bitcoin conference was here, and I know very little about it. So I was like, talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old, explain it to me. Yeah. And these guys are so immersed in it, they hadn't had to do it in a while. So they were like, this is actually good for us to do with a normie. Yeah. And one of the things that struck me about it the most was just their understanding and an ability to explain how money is broken. And them seeing the people that I talked to from other countries, they were very clear about the fact that in America, it is an investment. Right. In other countries, it is seen as a buffer against their currency that is not stable.
Right. It's like a store of value. Bitcoin was originally sold in the white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto, put out as a micropayment plan, like as a payment system. Right. It really has it seems like it may eventually get there, but it's mostly kind of a store of value. And at Reason, we've done a lot with talking about how Bitcoin is used, particularly in authoritarian regimes where you have to use the government, the state currency, which is shit. You can't use dollars or anything else. Like Bitcoin gives people a way of getting out of that system and holding on to value or sending it abroad in a way. So it's very useful from like for me, the most important thing about Bitcoin really is as a kind of human rights enabler. Like it just, it gives people more flexibility. I think in the US and in the developed world, it will act as a kind of supplement to state-based currencies and kind of hold them honest. Like the United States, by far the most important currency on the planet. And, we have the largest economy, particularly in terms of efficiency. China is getting there, but it takes so many more people to come close to us. It's not quite the same thing. But the, global currencies compete against one another, and that helps keep them more honest. And then Bitcoin really injects honesty into this. So I wouldn't quite say that money is broken. The United States is running a really dangerous bet that it will not win, that it can just keep piling up debt without having to worry about persistent massive inflation or reduced economic growth, et cetera. But, Bitcoin is going to help with that. I don't know exactly how AI will help with this, but I think, this is where we need to have a government that spends less and does less.
So how do you feel about Doge?
I like the concept of Doge very much. The execution so far has been bad. I mean, it's like it's a lot of flash, and it's not really cutting actual spending. Most of its big announcements end up being kind of revised way downward, when nobody's looking. And there are certain things where, say at places like the FDA or at the FAA and stuff like that, where if you simply cut regulators because you want to cut, you can find people and their salaries and you cut that, but the rules are still in place where stuff has to go through these, then you just make things even worse. Right. Because it takes longer for stuff to happen. But having said that, and this is why I still like Donald Trump winning over Kamala Harris, is that we're having a discussion that would not be taking place if Harris had won and if the Democrats had remained in power. And I think this is why Trump, I see him less as the beginning of something new and more as he's the end of an era. And it's this, sometimes I call it the long 20th century, where after World War II, we started having, or actually even before World War II, it was the progressive era and whatnot, but we started to believe that government should be run by experts who could make more and more decisions for us because, we're fucking idiots.
Right.
And we don't really, the world is too complex. And what do I know about how my kids should be educated or what my building should look like and how it should function or, whatever. And there was this broad shift, around the globe. It started, towards the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century with the progressive movement, but also in business, like things like Henry Ford and, Taylor, the great efficiency expert of like scientific management. Like in the 19th century, we learned a lot and we became smarter at how systems work. And then there's always people who emerge who say, well, you know what? We're very smart. And we understand from a bird's eye view how everything fits together. We don't expect you to because, you've got a lot on your plate and you're not that smart, et cetera. And in government and in business and in international affairs, we started trusting more and bigger groups that would make decisions for us. And that peaked probably in the middle to the late 20th century. And, it didn't work. Like, all of these giant corporations, IBM or, General Motors and, companies that don't even exist anymore. They were all like they were giant, bureaucracies that did things scientifically and, systematically. And they were like big government, which didn't work either. And, since at least the 90s, we've been walking away from that. And in a lot of ways, I see Trump as the final thing that kicks out the prop from that whole way of thinking about the world, that like big, overwhelming institutions that are run by wise and smart people and use science for everything, like it's over.
Yeah, it is.
Trump, but having said that, like there isn't a lot positive in Trump's vision. It's like, you either get with my program and do what I say, otherwise I'm going to deport you, or I'm going to unleash my attorneys general against you and things like that's not the way to build the next future, the next America. It's the end of an era. I don't think it's the beginning.
But I do feel like there are enough people around who, I don't know. It just depends on who's the loudest in the room, I guess. But they're the kind of techno optimists who all got on board with him. Yeah. These people seem to have a more optimistic vision of America.
They definitely do.
American,
ingenuity,
ability.
Innovation. And I agree. And, when you think about people like Mark Andreessen,
David Sachs.
Yeah. And I mean, Jeff Bezos, even, Tim Apple, as Trump used to refer to Tim Cook, because he didn't, he really is that guy, right? Where he is
the funniest president in the history of the world. He's like
the Seinfeld version of George Steinbrenner, where he sees his grandkid and he's like, fatty, shorty, red, but that's good. I mean, one thing that we need to also have caution about, and I say this as like, I'm a free market libertarian. Our reason slogan is free minds and free markets. I love the fact that Jeff Bezos at Amazon was like, fuck it, I'm turning the Washington Post opinion section. He said, we're going to focus on personal liberties and capitalism or free markets, right? And I'm like, yes, we need that. But we should also recognize that billionaires' agendas and everybody else's don't always line up exactly well. I mean, they do much more than people, think. And I hate, and this is going back maybe 10 years or whenever, AOC had a policy advisor who once famously said, every billionaire is a policy failure. Yeah. It's like, no, like Putin is a billionaire who got his money by stealing it from people. Muammar Gaddafi was a billionaire, but like Paul McCartney is a billionaire. Yeah. And Paul McCartney didn't steal money from me. It's like he gave me shit that I wanted. Jeff Bezos, there's faults around the edges, sure. But like, the way Jeff Bezos became a billionaire is by during a pandemic when nobody could do anything, like fucking guys would show up sometimes the same day with whatever I needed.
We like just that's made incredible. Jokes too about like all the people who are in that camp of like every billionaire is like every billionaire is a failure. They screamed as their guillotine arrived via Amazon.
That's right. Like, so that they could put it outside his mansion. I'm going out to protest
after my flag comes.
As soon as my masks show up, right?
Exactly.
And things like that. But so there is that, and I mean, this is but Trump ultimately he's not an optimist. He has a huge amount of energy, and he has like an intensely negative energy about him, I think. But again, I don't really care about him. What I'm saying, what's good, is that like by him winning, I think he caps this long era. It's the end of that gigantism era where like, the government's going to tell you how to live and big companies will make all your decisions for you and all of that. Like we've been working away from that forever. And it's like, now it's on all individuals to kind of take more control over their lives and responsibility for their lives and to help people who can't help themselves. But like I used to write a lot about education policy, and we're in an era now where school choice is burgeoning, and it's good. Like, because we had like factory, people were more outraged by like factory farmed chicken than factory farmed kids, where it's like all of us for 100 years went to the same schools and kind of were treated as if we were the same. And like, and then we're widgets. And at the end of, here's your diploma and now go whatever, like we're getting out of that. Like you, I don't drink anymore. Unlike you, I do other kinds of drugs, but I would guarantee that you, even if you're sober, like you are much more intentional about every aspect of your diet and your mood, like whether you use caffeine or other supplements or whatever. Like we're in an age now, in an era where all of us have to say, I have like unparalleled opportunities to be who I want to be, to live how I want to live, to commune with people who are like-minded and find them, through the internet and other places and move there and start, both in the cloud as well as in reality, like, the pods that I want to live in. And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of intensity. You're constantly teaching yourself things that are new and where do you want to go. And that's where we're at. And this is good. And it's coming, it would have come anyway. But I think by Trump winning, it comes, 5-10 years earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the mistake, there's so many things I'm thinking about right now. One is the internal debate in libertarianism. You see this in every party. So there's an internal war on the left. There's an internal war on the right as well, where there's the new right and the conservative right. And the new right and the conservative right they can be a good coalition, but there's not much.
And there's lefties now, particularly sometimes they're called the abundance agenda or the YIMBYs, who are like,
these are like Ezra Klein and them.
Yeah, he's and Derek Thompson and other people who kind of they are picking up on, but like where it's like, oh, you know what, in San Francisco there was a large group of people. It's like housing is really expensive, and a really obvious way to lower the price of housing is to build more housing.
Yeah.
So we got to get rid of a bunch of environmental rules and zoning rules that don't really do anything other than make housing really expensive to build. So let's do that. And so, this is on every point in the political spectrum.
There chaos.
Is discussion. Which is, again, the sign that we're at the end of something, right? And now the question is, how do we build what's next?
And this is where I think the right maybe doesn't understand maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't think that America will be all that excited into moving into some conservative vision of this is a joke I always make on stage where I'm like, right when Kamala got when she got nominated, they were like, oh, she's a slut, she slept her way to the top, and I'm like, and you're not gonna win over the suburban moms with that, because a lot of us slept our way to the bottom. There's just a lot of reformed sluts in the suburbs, and that's where we kind of all end up, and it's awesome.
I prefer to think that they're future sluts, but no, but I agree with you completely. Across every aspect, I think a lot about this because I don't have like that good a grasp of things. But like, I think a lot about either my grandparents or my parents' life and then my kids. And like, one of the most basic things is that, when I was growing up, it was better than it used to be, but like, there were maybe 5 types of guys you could be and 3 types of girls. And now it's like, no, there's like a million different identities.
You don't even have to be a guy if you're a guy.
Yeah. And again, like, not to get sidetracked into discussions about whether or not, transitioning for, in vitro embryos is good or bad, but it's like, we should celebrate the fact that more people have more choices. I always used to talk about this in terms of Pop-Tarts. Literally, when I was a kid, there were 4 types of Pop-Tarts that were all unfrosted. Now there's like 35, 36 types of Pop-Tarts that look different and are constantly changing. And like, that's the world. Everybody wants to be able to choose for themselves and say, I want to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and this, and I'm going to make it into my own personal Pop-Tart or whatever lifestyle. And I think conservatives make a big mistake when they think because people were like, Kamala Harris, I don't want that. I don't want what the Democratic Party was offering in, during COVID and where they were insane thought policing and policing and, doing all kinds of crazy shit. People rejected that. It didn't mean like, okay, now I want to live in some AI-generated fantasy of a 1950s household, where my wife has gigantic tits and a crinoline dress, and I make $6 a month, but I can feed a family of 20 on that.
That's my favorite Iowa hawk, going after all these people with their AI-generated slop, and he's like, "This is not the world that we lived in the 1950s." By the way,
he had a great string just the day that we're recording this. Where, he was like, here's what a 1950s house looked like. Here's what it cost, et cetera. And like, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, like, are they in Schindler's List or something? It's like, it's a 800 square foot house, that has 5 people in it or more. And it's like, this is not, this isn't this isn't what people want. People want choice. And because I suspect, if you disagree, challenge me on it, but like, what I wanted when I was 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and 60, like, has changed. And it's not like I'm not flippant about it or anything, but like, you change and you grow and you want to be able to kind of evolve, on your own pace as well as react to society. And like, I went from loving living in a small town to wanting to be in a big city and then splitting time, et cetera, and it's like what people want more than anything is choice. And I think the political party certainly, but also the kind of broader based ideology or cultural climate that gives people more choice and then helps them correct course when they make bad choices. This is what the future could be. Yeah. And I think it would be, it would be fantastic.
Yeah. I think that my sister and I were just talking about this actually on the way here. We were laughing because she has 3 kids and they're older. She started very young, so her kids are like 20s and late teens. And so she's seen, it's like you guys are like war veterans. You're like, she's like, I love it when people with children who are 8 are giving parenting advice. You're like, shut up. You're gonna get your ass handed to you in like 5 years. Yeah. But she was saying, we were laughing about the like no phones in schools debate because I'm like, this feels ridiculous to me because more importantly, how the fuck are you going to teach these children with AI? Yeah. Like, how are you going to ensure that these kids are learning? How do you use AI? None of these teachers are even contemplating that. It's so much easier to be like, we need to get schools we need to get phones out of the schools.
And we need more money and we need new HVAC stuff, et cetera. Like, the big thing is, I'm sure your daughter is 3? Almost 3. Like, by the time she's in high school, I hope that school will look radically different. Like, it would be unrecognizable to you as a 15-year-old. I hope so too,
because I hated school. It felt like jail to me.
Yeah. It is jail.
I hated it.
It's a minimum security jail.
I left all the time. I skipped a third of my junior year of high school. I hated it. And then I was going to college and I'm like, why am I paying for this now? Which is a huge part of the reason that I dropped out. I'm like, I'm going to go into debt for more jail, basically. And I had already partied in high school, so I wasn't like, yay, I'm free to party now. I just didn't see the point of it. But high school to me felt, I was like, how have we not reformed the school system? By the way, a degree is not going to mean anything. And everyone older than me was like, that's not true. A degree is going to get you a job. And it's like, it doesn't assure it.
That was part of, that thing of like, okay, as we get systematic and we have bright people and, a college diploma was like, the ticket to.
For one generation.
Yeah, probably.
Basically one generation.
Yeah.
And then now and now all the kids want to be influencers. And frankly, I don't blame them.
Yeah. Although, boy, that I can't imagine that's a good life.
No,
hard.
Anyone who, this is the thing I say. I'm like, I could do an entire hour-long stand-up special just about feeding the algorithm.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we all sound psychotic, by the way, when we talk about the algorithm, because we sound like primitive people talking about the ancient
like
gods
or something.
Where it's oh, we must, if we don't feed the algorithm every day, it will like ignore us.
Yeah.
Like it will rain upon us if we give it the blessings. Yeah. It's ridiculous. But I used to wonder why these old kind of like back in the day, they seem so quaint now, like YouTube athletic influencers. They all had breakdowns. I watched one woman after another, and I'm like, come on, how hard could this be? You're just making content. And now that I do it, I'm like, I get it. I understand why.
But
I might have a breakdown.
Have you found, because this is also, there's always like, there's learning curves, right? Both individual and then kind of society wide. Do you feel like you have gotten to a place now where you have a more stable audience?
They're stable, yeah.
More
stable.
And like you develop a reputation so that it's less, you always want to have like a breakout hit of something that brings new people in. But,
I think so many things have changed. I think the algorithms changed. Yeah. I don't think you get bumps from going on big podcasts in the way that you do. Maybe you'll get a little bit, but I don't think you get those, like it used to be even 8 years ago, you could get I don't think it's rewarded that way. I think now it's more like virality, which is what the internet thrives on and really wants. But I'm not really interested in going viral because it's never good. Like it's good in some ways, but it's not really that good. Yeah. I would as much as I hate to say it, I would rather grow in the way that we've grown, which is very organic, very slow, and it's like a cult following that of people who know us and have seen us through things, and it's a I don't know. I just find it to be. I'm grateful I didn't create my brand around like my family or domesticity or that like all those brands weird me out, and I'm like that is. And people are, I think there's a normie revolt against all the influencers right now.
Because you also know that it's
fake.
Yeah. like it's either totally fake or it's effectively fake. But who is going to be the, and this might be a good betting pool, is like which family-based influencer is going to become like the next Manson family or the Menendez.
Well, all the influencer kids are growing up and suing their parents.
Yeah.
This is like a real thing. So we're having the first generation of kids that was raised as influencer kids without their choice, by the way. Right. They're now growing up and saying I was essentially like a slave. It was like slave wage.
That's great.
And that they wouldn't let me get out of it. I was forced to do it. And
this is good for the total fertility rate. We're going to need to import more immigrants to keep the population up because these kids aren't going to be having kids.
Even though that's another interesting thing, because even when you look at like all of the immigration, everywhere, the birth rate's collapsing.
Well, that's because my belief in that is it's modernity, and modernity means one that you have more options in your life, particularly women, and there's like a very widely observed correlation between the more years of schooling women have, the fewer kids they have. It's a proxy for a more advanced economy where you don't need to have as many kids. People are moving from, kind of physical labor to mental labor, or
influencing,
influencer
labor.
But it's not a bad thing. It's a thing, and nothing is going to reverse it.
Well, it's weird. I feel like I had this argument with people years ago because there was this really cool video about how the 12 billionth person would never be born.
Right.
And it was done it was when everyone was freaking out about overpopulation, which was not that long ago.
No.
It was like a decade ago. Yeah. And I was like, guys, calm down. Like everywhere you go all over the world, the more that people get lifted out of poverty, which is happening. Thank you, capitalism. Yeah. The fewer kids they have. And then now everyone's freaking out.
And it's like, we got to do something. And this is where, it's not Trump per se, although J.D. Vance has advanced ideas for legislation about this. And a lot of people on the conservative right of like, okay, what we need to do is to shovel tons of money at parents. Stalin did this. Like every dictator and every other person has tried to do this to incentivize. It's always the right type of people to have more kids. And it really doesn't work because, and also it breeds resentment because, again, I have two kids. Yeah, right. That's the one thing it reliably breeds. It's just, I always feel bad for people who are told like somehow you are lesser if you don't have kids, whether it's by choice or by circumstance. But we'll be able to deal with fewer people on the planet, and we'll create AI, bots, things that will do the work that needs to get done. And I think the rest of us will do pretty well.
I want to do a routine about, I have a whole idea for a routine about the the working robots and restaurants and stuff.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's going to be so weird.
Last night I saw some of the delivery robots, the Uber Eats delivery robots here, who I'd seen in Santa Monica during the pandemic when I was hanging out.
The little driving ones?
Yeah, and like that's... the dot matrix printer version of what's to come.
Totally.
But, because
those are like the fax machines of deliveries.
Yeah, like it's going to be great when they show up and they cook the food for you and they clean your house.
They have these home robots now and they have the ads for them. Oh, God.
It's kind of, it's very exciting, especially if you take it with a sense of optimism rather than dread, right?
It could get weird.
Oh, it will be weird.
I mean, even somebody was like, get that camera out of... I was stalking my daughter when I was doing comedy, and this guy was like, get that camera out of your kid's daughter. She's too old for that. And I was like, no, I'm just preparing her for a lifetime of surveillance.
Yeah.
Like, that is the technocracy that she will be born into.
Well, this is what's interesting is, it's thinking about that in surveillance versus the fancy counter word is surveillance, which is surveillance is like looking down from above. And it's always associated with, power and like the government or a corporation or whatever. We've seen a million movies like that. Surveillance is when individuals like look back at the, and they're watching the watchers. And, in stuff like 1984, it was always the telescreen was on. You didn't know what was behind it, but, it was being beamed onto you and people were tracking you. A lot of the technology that we have now allows you to kind of find out more information about, the powers that be. And it's not perfect and it's always a struggle, but that's the revolution of like the personal computer going from a mainframe computer, which had those big banks and the things that would spin and like it would, somebody in a one-piece suit with a bald head would take out a card and be like, oh, you've been selected to be killed in the next war. So just report to the death center now, right? And then like personal computers starting in the late 60s, but especially in the 70s, were like, no, we're making the computer an extension of me as an individual, and I am going to be calling the shots. And then the internet, like we're going to have an interrelated set of networks where end users are as important as whatever the center was, or the center disappears. And I think, kind of keeping that in mind and pushing that forward, like technology is good when it empowers individuals, not when it makes it easier for, some overlord to dictate everything.
Yeah. Well, we've got to go, but what's your biggest defect of character?
Biggest defect of character, I was going to say it was drinking, but that's not, I don't know that that's a real There were times when I really just lacked empathy, I think, and that probably fueled a lot of the worst elements of, when I drank too much and acted poorly.
And what's your biggest asset?
I'm very curious, I think, and I read a lot and I listen to a lot of different types of people, and I like going out into the world, both physically but also kind of mentally.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that too. Well, where can we find you?
I'm at reason.com. All of my stuff ends up there on Twitter. I'm at Nick Gillespie. And that's probably, and sadly, the place where I reside the most.
It's the same for me.
Yeah.
Shameful.
It's
Although I have been on Instagram more using Reels like a normie, and because they are very relatable for like just suburban moms.
Yeah.
And I watched a woman eating a piece of sourdough, like a whole, and I was like, this is my fucking rock bottom. Like, I watched a whole minute and a half of this, and I was like, what am I doing with my life?
I find the Facebook's version of Reels, that's the lowest form of video. But, the one thing that is great, and I don't think enough people talk about it in a way where it's not like bragging, but like the experience of parenting is absolutely phenomenal.
It's the best.
It makes you humble. It also makes you interested and curious, and you stay in touch with the world.
Youth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a really powerful way. And it's kind of a model for everything, where it is like you're anxious about everything all the time, but you're also kind of optimistic, and you take the plot seriously, because this thing is constantly changing and unfolding and growing.
It's crazy how fast it is, like watching AI become sentient that first year. You're like, whoa, you came online.
Yeah, that's
even
right.
those first 3 months, you're like, holy mackerel. And now even just the first 3 years. Yeah, there's a great documentary that Lenore Skenazy told me about, and it's Becoming You on Apple Plus. It's like 5 or 6 part series, and it follows 100 kids all over the world in the first 5 years of their life. And it is incredible.
Yeah.
My daughter was obsessed with it for when she was like, before even 1, it was all she ever wanted to, or no, 1 to 2. She was just like, that was the thing she wanted to watch when we let her watch TV.
That sounds great.
So she loved it.
Similar to that, I remember when my older son learned to read, and my ex-wife and I we were nervous about like him learning to read, and we're both like eggheads. So we actually bought Hooked on Phonics.
Oh, yeah.
Which fucking worked.
It
was
does.
Great.
They got away from it, and they're finding it's been a disaster.
But when, so he was learning how to read. And then I remember one time he was in the living room of the house we were in at the time, and he was reading something, like without me coaching him or anything. And it was like, I think about it and I choke up, because it's like, at that moment, that's like you become sentient, because it's not just that you can read what you've been taught, but you are now going out in the world, and like you will read sentences and you'll form sentences that have never been spoken before or anything. And you just realize like this is just accelerating outward, and it's
so
like,
empowering.
It's really wonderful.
Oh,
but anxiety inducing.
Oh yeah, terrifying. Nothing more terrifying than being a parent. But thank you so much for coming through.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.